Am I ready to see the look on their faces when I finally say the words? I've been called unpredictable before. People say I make choices that no one else would dare to make. But this one was different. This wasn't about risk in business, or science, or money. This was about my family. This was about values. This was about what I want my children, and yes, even my mother, to remember about me when they look back on my life one day. And the weight of that thought was heavier than any business deal, any launch, or any invention I've ever worked on. Because rockets can fail, businesses can stumble, ideas can be criticized. But when it comes to family, the stakes are so much higher. You don't get a second chance to make them feel heard. You don't get to rebuild trust once it's broken. So there I was, carrying this secret decision, knowing that eventually I would have to share it, knowing that it might surprise, confuse, or even disappoint the people I care about most. But also knowing that if I stayed silent, I would be living a life that wasn't true to who I really am. And so I stood at that edge, caught between fear and conviction, not yet ready to speak, but unable to let go. When the day finally came, I sat across from my family, and for a moment I thought about keeping it inside just a little longer. Silence can feel safer than truth. But then I remembered why I had carried this decision so heavily in the first place. It wasn't meant to stay hidden, it was meant to be spoken. So I took a breath, looked into their eyes, and I said the words that no one expected to hear from me. I told them that for the first time in my adult life I was stepping back, not from everything, but from enough to feel the difference. I wasn't leaving the world of rockets or cars or ideas, but I was choosing to give more of my time to something I had often pushed aside, my family. That was the decision. Not a new company, not a new invention, not another risk that could make or break the future. The decision was that I would spend less time chasing the next breakthrough and more time being present with the people I love. And I can't explain to you how heavy that felt, even as I spoke it. For years, my identity had been tied to the next launch, the next challenge, the next impossible dream. But in the quiet spaces of my heart, I had begun to realize that while the world may never stop demanding my time, my family deserved more of it than I had been giving. At first, there was silence in the room. My words seemed to hang in the air, like no one was quite sure they had heard me correctly. My son's eyes widened in confusion, and my mother leaned in slightly, as if to make sure she understood what I had just said. You see, to the outside world, it might not sound shocking. Fathers spend time with their children. Sons spend time with their mothers. But for my family, who had seen me sacrifice sleep, comfort, and years of my life for ideas that were bigger than myself, this sounded almost unthinkable. They knew how much I loved my work, how deeply I believed in the mission to push humanity forward. So for me to say I was choosing them over the endless pursuit of progress, that was the unexpected part. And in that moment, I felt two things at once. Relief, because I had finally spoken the truth that had been living inside me, and fear, because I had no idea how they would react. I wondered what my 5-year-old son would think. Would he even understand what I meant? Would he care? Would he shrug it off like it was nothing? Or would it matter to him more than I could ever know? And I wondered about my mother, May. She had been with me through every stage of this life, the failures, the breakthroughs, the storms. What would she say now, hearing that I was finally choosing to pause, even just a little, in a life that had always been defined by speed? When I finally said the words out loud, that I was stepping back, even just a little, to be with them more, the silence stretched across the room like a long shadow. And then, like sunlight breaking through clouds, the first reaction came from the smallest voice. My son, X, only 5 years old, looked at me with eyes so wide they seemed to carry both surprise and something deeper hope. Children may not understand the weight of business decisions or the complexity of billion-dollar projects, but they understand presence. They understand when their father is there and when he is not. Does that mean, he asked slowly, his little voice unsteady with curiosity, you'll be home for bedtime more? The question struck me harder than any headline, harder than any criticism I had ever faced in public, because hidden in that simple question was the truth of what I had been missing. Rockets and cars and technology may capture the world's imagination, but for a child, nothing matters more than whether dad is there to read the story, to turn off the lights, to whisper goodnight. I nodded. Yes, I said softly. It means I'll be there more. And in an instant, his face lit up like he had just been told the greatest news of his life. No talk of Mars or inventions had ever brought that kind of joy to his eyes. He didn't cheer or clap. He just smiled, climbed into my lap, and wrapped his arms around me as if he never wanted to let go. It was then I realized that to him, my decision wasn't complicated at all. It wasn't about balance sheets or global missions. It was about one thing, his dad choosing him. Across the room, my mother, May, 77 years old, and a woman who has seen and endured more than most could imagine, sat in silence for a long time. She had always been my compass in moments of uncertainty, and I could see her trying to process what I had just said. Finally, she leaned forward, resting her hands gently on the table. Her voice, calm but trembling slightly with emotion, carried the weight of decades. "Elon," she said, "do you know how many times I wished you would make this choice? I never told you, because I knew how much the world expected from you. I didn't want to be the one to hold you back. But I always hoped you would realize that sometimes the most important progress is not what you build, but who you build it with." Her words sank into me like water into dry soil. For so many years, I had seen my work as a gift to the future, something that would benefit generations yet to come. But May reminded me that there was also a present moment, a family, right here, who needed me not as an inventor, not as a public figure, but simply as a son and a father. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. "I am proud of everything you've done," she continued. "But I would be even more proud to see you take care of yourself, to take care of us, while you still can. The world will always ask for more from you, but your family, we only ask for you." I felt the air grow heavier with meaning. I glanced back at X, still curled against me, his head resting on my chest. His breathing was steady, peaceful. For him, my words were already a promise. For May, my decision was a fulfillment of something she had silently prayed for over the years. And in that room, for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I rarely allow myself to feel. Stillness. Not the frantic rush of deadlines, not the endless pull of ambition, but the calm that comes when you know you are exactly where you're supposed to be. I thought about all the sacrifices Maya had made when I was young, the struggles she endured as a single mother, moving us from place to place, always making sure we had enough, even when she did not. I thought about the strength it took for her to raise me and my siblings, to push us to dream even when the world told us to settle. And here she was now, still guiding me, reminding me that even the biggest dreamers need to remember the simple human truths. She smiled then, not the kind of smile for cameras, not the smile she shows the world at events, but the private smile of a mother who finally sees her child understand something essential. "Elon," she said softly, "this is the bravest decision you've ever made." I wanted to argue, to tell her that building rockets or changing industries was harder. But in my heart, I knew she was right. Because courage isn't only about doing what others think is impossible. Sometimes courage is about turning inward, about saying no to the noise of the world so you can say yes to the people who matter most. As I sat there, my son in my arms and my mother's hand over mine, I realized that history might not record this moment. It wouldn't make headlines or trend on social media the way a new rocket launch would. But for me, this was history. This was the kind of decision that shapes not just a career, but a legacy. That night, long after the words had been spoken and the first reactions had passed, I sat alone in the quiet of my home and let it all sink in. The decision that had seemed so impossible only days before now felt inevitable, like it had been waiting inside me all along, just needing the courage to be released. I thought about the faces of my family at that table. X, his pure joy at the idea of me being home more often, his innocence cutting through all the noise of the world. And my mother, Maya, with her steady wisdom, reminding me of something I had almost forgotten, that no amount of progress is worth it if you leave behind the people who love you most. And then I thought about the world outside those walls, a world that has always looked at me and expected the next big thing, the next announcement, the next disruption. I imagined the headlines that might come: Elon Musk slows down, Musk focuses on family, and I wondered how people would react. Some would be surprised, some would be disappointed, some might even laugh. But none of that mattered anymore, because the truth was, I wasn't making this choice for them. For so long, my life has been about the future of humanity, the future of technology, the future of planets we haven't even walked on yet. But that future will mean little if I miss the moments that matter in the present. If I miss my son's laughter, if I miss my mother's stories, if I miss the small, ordinary days that no invention can ever replace. It's strange, isn't it? How easy it is to think that meaning lies in the extraordinary, when sometimes it hides in the simplest of things. A bedtime story, a walk with your mother, a meal shared without rushing to the next meeting. For decades, I chased the extraordinary. Now, for the first time, I am choosing the ordinary and discovering that it is far more extraordinary than I ever imagined. The truth is, I don't know how this decision will change my life in the long run. I don't know if I'll regret stepping back, even slightly, from the endless race I've been running. But what I do know is that I'll never regret the look on my son's face when I promised him more nights at home. I'll never regret the gratitude in my mother's eyes when she realized I was listening to her not just as a visionary, but as her son. Maybe that's the lesson I was meant to learn all along, that while we strive to change the world, the real change begins at home, with the people who know us not as leaders, not as innovators, not as icons, but simply as family. And perhaps that's the greatest paradox of all. The world will remember me for rockets, for cars, for ideas that seemed impossible. But my family will remember me for the nights I came home, for the stories I told, for the way I chose them when I didn't have to. And in the end, maybe that's the legacy that matters most. I looked again at X before he went to bed that night. He tugged at my sleeve and said, "Daddy, can we make pancakes tomorrow morning?" It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a question of possibility. It was the natural confidence of a child who believed his father would be there. And in that small request, I found the weight of everything I had been missing. "Yes," I told him, "we'll make pancakes." He smiled, satisfied, and went off to sleep. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the biggest promises are kept not on the world stage, but in the quiet of your own home. So here I am, telling you this not as a public statement, not as a CEO, but as a man who finally understood something simple. Family is not what waits for you after your work is done. Family is the reason you work at all. Mark my words, when all is said and done, and when history writes its chapters, what matters most won't just be the missions, the inventions, the companies. It will be the relationships, the people, the love we choose to protect when the world tries to pull us away. And now, I want to ask you, what about your life? What decision have you been putting off that your family has been quietly hoping you'll make? What would it mean if you finally said yes to them, even in a small way? When I thought about that question for myself, it was uncomfortable, because for years I convinced myself that postponing family moments was a kind of sacrifice for the greater good. I told myself that building rockets, cars, and companies would one day give my children a better future, even if it cost me time with them in the present. It sounded noble, almost heroic, but the truth? It was also an excuse to avoid the harder work, the emotional work of being truly present. Presence is harder than building machines, because machines don't need you to listen. They don't ask you to be vulnerable. They don't need your patience when they're hurt, or your comfort when they're afraid. But people do. Family does. And sometimes that is the very reason we avoid it, because it requires more of us than any invention ever could. I've learned that love is not something you can store up and give later, when you finally have more time. Love is only real when it is shared in the moment. A child doesn't remember the toys you bought them. They remember the afternoons you spent playing on the floor. A parent doesn't need your success. They need your presence, your laughter, your willingness to sit with them and hear their stories again and again. The longer I live, the more I see that the weight of our lives is not measured in accomplishments, but in connections. When the world applauds you, it feels good for a moment. When your family embraces you, it lasts a lifetime. I used to believe that my legacy would be defined by the things I built. Now, I am starting to believe that it will be defined by the relationships I nurture. Maybe rockets and cars will one day be forgotten, replaced by something newer, faster, more advanced. But the memories I leave with my son, the respect I show my mother, the love I give to my family, those will not fade in the same way. They will live on in the people who carry them forward. I sometimes wonder what the future version of me will remember. 20 years from now, will I think back to the countless hours in front of screens, meetings, deadlines? That night, those words finally made sense to me in a way they never had before. Every beautiful object in that house required maintenance, cleaning, security, insurance, property taxes. Each room needed heating, cooling, repairs. The pool, the landscaping, the driveways, all of it demanded attention and resources. But more than the time and money, I realized there was a deeper cost I hadn't recognized. Each possession carried a small but real psychological weight. Each item represented a decision I once made, a responsibility I had taken on, a small claim on my mental bandwidth. I sat down at my kitchen table, a beautiful custom piece that had taken months to create, and started making a list of what actually brought value to my life. What I genuinely needed versus what I had accumulated because I thought I should have it, or because it seemed impressive. The list of necessities was surprisingly short. That weekend, I didn't go into the office. Instead, I went through every room in the house, really looking at each item and asking myself, if I didn't already own this, would I buy it again today? Does this add more value to my life than the freedom I would have without it? The answer, for the vast majority of things, was no. I realized I had fallen into a trap that many people do when they achieve some financial success. I had been collecting possessions not because they improved my life in any meaningful way, but because they matched some image of success I had absorbed without questioning. The more I thought about it, the more I recognized that what I really valued wasn't any of these things. What I valued was freedom, the freedom to focus entirely on work that fascinates me, the freedom to spend quality time with my children without distractions, the freedom to move quickly, think clearly, and make decisions based on what matters most to me rather than what I've already invested in. And every possession that didn't directly support those priorities wasn't just neutral, it was actively working against them. That's when I made the decision. I would sell nearly everything, starting with the houses. I would reduce my life to the essentials. Not because I couldn't afford these things, but because I couldn't afford what they were costing me in focus, freedom, and clarity. When I announced this publicly, the reactions were fascinating. Some people thought it was a sign I was having a breakdown. Others assumed it was some elaborate tax strategy. Few seemed to understand that it was actually the most rational decision I could make based on what I truly valued. The process of selling was surprisingly emotional. Each house represented memories. Each object told a story. There were moments of doubt, especially when letting go of things that had once seemed so important to acquire. But with each sale, each empty room, each simplified space, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. It was as if I could suddenly breathe more deeply. I kept only what directly supported what mattered most to me: my work and my children. Everything else, I let go. Now I live in a small house that I rent. I own very few things. When I need something, I can buy it. When I'm done with it, I can let it go without attachment. The change in my mental clarity has been remarkable. Without the constant low-level drain of maintaining and managing possessions, my mind feels sharper, more focused on what truly matters to me. This doesn't mean everyone should sell everything they own. That's not the point. The point is to question the unconscious assumptions we make about what we need to be happy or successful. For too many of us, possessions start as things we want, transform into things we think we need, and end up as burdens we don't know how to live without. We become curators of our own museums, maintaining collections that no longer serve any purpose except habit. What I've learned is that true freedom isn't about having everything you want. It's about being unburdened by things you don't need. I remember a particular moment that really crystallized this for me. About a month after selling my main house, I needed to retrieve some documents from storage. As I was looking through the boxes, I found an expensive watch I had completely forgotten owning. It had been sitting in that box for over 2 years. I sat there holding this watch that had cost more than what many people make in a year, that I had once been so excited to acquire, and realized I hadn't even remembered its existence. It hadn't added any value to my life for years. Instead, it had just been one more thing to track, insure, and worry about losing. That watch became a symbol to me of how easily we confuse acquiring with experiencing, having with enjoying. I ended up giving it away to someone who would actually wear and appreciate it daily, and that decision brought me more satisfaction than owning it ever had. I'm not saying material things can't bring joy or have value. Of course they can. A comfortable bed, tools that help you work effectively, items with genuine sentimental meaning, these things can enhance life. But for every possession that truly adds value, most of us have dozens that don't. And we rarely stop to question the cumulative weight of maintaining all those things, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally. Since simplifying my life, I've noticed I make decisions differently. I'm less likely to solve problems by throwing money or resources at them. I'm more creative, more willing to find solutions that don't involve acquiring something new. I sleep better. I'm more present with my children when I'm with them. I can change course more quickly when needed. Most surprisingly, I enjoy the few things I do own much more deeply. When you have less, you notice and appreciate what remains. This journey has also made me think differently about time. We often don't recognize how much time we spend managing, maintaining, organizing, cleaning, and worrying about our possessions. When I eliminated most of mine, I suddenly had hours each week that I hadn't even realized I was losing. It's made me wonder how many people live in a kind of time poverty, not because they don't have enough hours in the day, but because they filled those hours with the maintenance of things that don't truly matter to them. What's particularly interesting is how this decision has affected my work. Many people assumed that selling my houses was a sign I was less committed to my companies, that perhaps I was planning an exit. The reality was exactly the opposite. By simplifying my personal life, I created more mental and emotional space for the work that truly matters to me. I found I had more energy, more clarity, and more focus for the challenges of building companies and developing technologies that could meaningfully impact humanity's future. I've come to believe that for many people, especially those in creative or demanding fields, simplicity isn't just a personal lifestyle choice, it can be a professional advantage. When your life is cluttered with possessions demanding attention, some part of your mind is always occupied with their management, even if you're not consciously aware of it. I now see my previous attachment to multiple large homes and numerous possessions as a kind of unconscious compensation. Perhaps for working too much, perhaps for not spending enough time with family, perhaps for some deeper insecurity about status or accomplishment. Whatever the psychological roots, the possessions weren't solving the underlying issues. They were just masking them. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes from eliminating distractions and simplifying your environment. Ideas flow more easily, priorities become sharper, decisions become clearer. I'm not advocating for extreme minimalism or suggesting that owning nothing is somehow morally superior. I'm talking about thoughtful reduction, about consciously choosing what deserves space in your life rather than accumulating by default. For me, the process revealed something unexpected. How many of my purchasing decisions had been made almost unconsciously, based on assumptions about what someone in my position should have, rather than what actually enhanced my life. Take art, for example. I had collected numerous expensive pieces that I thought I should appreciate. Some of them I did genuinely enjoy, but many I had selected because they seemed like the kind of art someone like me should own, not because they moved me or brought me daily joy. When I started asking myself the hard questions about each piece, does this actually enhance my experience of this space? Would I choose it again today? I found that much of what I owned was serving a purpose other than my own genuine enjoyment. The same was true of houses. Did I need multiple large properties? Was I using them in ways that justified their enormous cost, not just financially, but in terms of management and mental overhead? The honest answer was no. This experience has made me think deeply about the nature of wealth and what it means to live well. Traditional definitions of wealth focus on accumulation, having more money, more properties, more possessions than others. But there's another kind of wealth that comes from needing less, from being unburdened by excess, from having the freedom to focus your resources both financial and attentional, on what truly matters to you. I now think of wealth not in terms of what I can afford to acquire, but in terms of what I can afford to live without. This shift in perspective has practical implications beyond just personal possessions. It's changed how I think about the companies I build, the projects I take on, and the way I allocate resources. At Tesla and SpaceX, we've implemented versions of this principle, ruthlessly eliminating unnecessary processes, questioning default assumptions about what's needed, focusing resources intensely on what actually advances our core mission rather than spreading them across everything we could potentially do. The result has been companies that can move more quickly, adapt more readily, and focus more intensely than if we tried to do everything that seemed like a good idea. By eliminating the unnecessary, we've created space for what's essential. I think many people, especially as they grow older, intuitively understand what I'm talking about. There's a reason why people often speak of downsizing in their later years not as a loss but as a liberation. They've lived long enough to recognize what actually matters, what actually brings satisfaction, and they're ready to let go of the rest. But we don't have to wait until we're older to make these discoveries. We can start asking these questions at any point. What am I maintaining that isn't enhancing my life? What am I holding on to out of habit rather than genuine value? What would happen if I let this go? The answers might surprise you, as they surprised me. I'm not saying everyone should sell their home or give away their belongings. That was the right decision for me based on my specific circumstances and values. But I do believe everyone could benefit from asking themselves a simple question. If I didn't already own this, would I buy it again today? For the things where the answer is no, consider letting them go, not to deprive yourself, but to free yourself. In a culture that constantly tells us we need more space, more stuff, more options, choosing less can feel radical, but it might be the most liberating choice you ever make. I've noticed something interesting since sharing this perspective publicly. People often assume that I'm suggesting everyone should live with bare necessities, almost like a monk. But that's not what I'm advocating at all. What I'm suggesting is consciousness and intentionality about what we allow into our lives. For some people, certain possessions, whether it's books, tools, art, or other objects, genuinely enhance their existence and bring daily value. There's nothing wrong with having things that truly serve you. The problem arises when we accumulate without questioning, when we hold on to things out of habit or perceived obligation rather than genuine utility or joy. I still own things. I have clothes I enjoy wearing, books I value reading, and tools that help me work effectively. The difference is that now everything I own has earned its place in my life through conscious choice rather than default accumulation. What I've discovered is that possessions often promise freedom, the freedom to enjoy luxury, to have options, to display success. But too often, they end up restricting freedom instead, limiting our ability to change, to move, to focus on what truly matters to us. I chose to sell almost everything because I valued freedom more than possessions. The freedom to pursue the work that fascinates me, the freedom to be fully present with the people I love, the freedom to change course without the weight of what I've already accumulated. And that freedom has been worth far more than anything I sold to gain it. I think about my grandparents often during this journey. They lived through challenging times when resources were scarce, and they developed a relationship with possessions very different from what's common today. They kept what was useful, repaired what was broken, and passed on what was no longer needed. They didn't accumulate for status or out of habit. Each thing in their home had a purpose, a story, a reason for being there. Nothing was disposable. Nothing was thoughtlessly acquired. There was a wisdom in their approach that our culture of abundance and easy acquisition has largely forgotten. A recognition that our relationship with physical things matters, that what we choose to surround ourselves with shapes our experience, our attention, and ultimately our lives. When I look back at the enormous houses I once owned, filled with beautiful things that demanded attention but added little value to my daily life, I don't feel loss. I feel as though I've awakened from a kind of trance, a spell that had me believing I needed all those things to be happy or successful. The truth was exactly the opposite. What I needed was to be unburdened by them. There's a particular memory that stands out to me from this process. I was selling a house that had a beautiful view, one I had once believed I couldn't live without. As I stood there on the terrace one last time, looking out at that view, I realized something important. The joy of that view didn't come from owning it. It came from experiencing it. And I could experience beautiful views anywhere without the burden of owning and maintaining a multi-million-dollar property to access them. That realization, that experience and ownership are separate things, has been liberating in countless ways. I've found I can enjoy beautiful spaces, objects, and environments without needing to possess them. I can appreciate without acquiring. There's a clarity that comes with simplicity. When you strip away what's unnecessary, what remains stands out more clearly. Your priorities become sharper, your choices become more intentional. That clarity has been the greatest gift of this decision, greater than any possession I ever owned. I often think about what I would tell my younger self about possessions and success if I could go back in time. I would tell him that true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what owns you. That freedom comes not from having everything you want, but from needing very little. I would tell him that the most valuable things in life, creative work that matters, deep relationships, time to think and explore, are all enhanced by simplicity and hindered by unnecessary complexity. And I would tell him that no object, no matter how beautiful or expensive or impressive, is worth the mental freedom that comes from being unburdened by excess. This journey of simplification has made me question other defaults I once accepted without thinking. If I was wrong about needing multiple houses and countless possessions, what else might I be wrong about? What other unconscious assumptions might be limiting my thinking, my happiness, or my effectiveness? That questioning has led to other changes. In how I structure my time, in how I approach relationships, in how I make decisions about what projects to take on. In each area, I've found that consciously examining defaults, rather than automatically accepting them, leads to choices that better align with what I truly value. The philosopher Diogenes once said, "It is not that I own little, but that you want a lot." There's profound wisdom in those words. So much of what we think we need is actually manufactured want, created by comparison, marketing, or unconscious assumptions about what success should look like. When we step back and honestly assess what actually enhances our lives, what makes us healthier, more effective, more present, more alive, the list is often much shorter than what we've been led to believe. For me, that list includes meaningful work, time with my children, good health, mental clarity, close relationships, continuous learning, and the freedom to pursue ideas that might help humanity. Almost everything else turned out to be optional. I'm still learning and evolving in this journey. I haven't achieved some perfect state of minimalism, nor do I think that's the goal. The goal is alignment, having what surrounds you reflect what truly matters to you, not what others think should matter. Some days I still find myself tempted by some new thing that promises to improve life in some marginal way. The difference now is that I recognize the pattern and can ask myself the harder questions before acquiring, will this actually enhance what matters most to me? Or will it just be one more thing to maintain, manage, and eventually discard? The most surprising outcome of this journey has been how it's affected my happiness. I didn't sell my possessions because I thought it would make me happier. I did it because I wanted the freedom and focus their absence would create. But increased happiness has been an unexpected side effect. There's a lightness that comes from owning less, from needing less, from being less tethered to physical things. A sense of possibility